Welcome, everybody. My name is Thomas Reed. We're going to be talking about some Mac malware stuff. That's kind of my thing that I like to talk about, and some of the problems of what I like to call Mac Vista, which I think you'll appreciate. I am now working at Huntress. I'm the product manager for Mac EDR at Huntress. And you'll see some contact info for me up there. What we're going to start out with is we're going to talk about some of the Mac threats that we've seen with EDR this year so far. Now, before we get into that, just a little bit of background. So in the past, when I've given these talks, I've been at an AV company, an antivirus. What's the difference between antivirus and EDR? So just a little rundown on what the difference is and why there's going to be a difference in what I'm talking about today versus what I've talked about in the past. Antivirus is there to detect so-called known bad. So, things that we know, we've seen this malware before, we know what it does, we know what it looks like. We can write a rule for it. You can also have antivirus that has some heuristics, some kind of machine learning or something along those lines, and that can detect something that might be similar to something that you've seen before, but it really doesn't detect absolutely new, novel things. The good thing about antivirus, it usually has low false positives, not always, but in theory it should be able to. And you really don't have to have a whole lot of expertise to use it. It says, hey, this thing is bad, I'm getting rid of it for you. And you only have a problem when that thing wasn't actually bad. So EDR, on the other hand, is entirely behavioral. So it's looking at what's going on the machine, and it's deciding, oh, hey, I see this thing that's really doing something suspicious. There's something shady going on here. It doesn't necessarily tell you this is absolutely 100% bad. And because of this, EDR can detect new things. However, it can also have a lot of false positive. It can flag something that's actually legitimate, which means you need a little bit more expertise to use an EDR product than to use an antivirus product, because you need a security operations center or something like that in order to really understand what's going on there. So we are going to dive into the EDR side of things today. We're going to look at some of the things that we have seen, some of the suspicious activities that have popped up on some of our customers' machines. So let's enter the dungeon. I'm going to start off with a story about something that our research team found on a customer machine. So we had a customer that they said, hey, we don't have your agent on this endpoint yet, but we think it might be infected. So can you help us out? And so they, got everything installed, and our researchers started looking, found all kinds of really weird stuff going on there. And the three guys who investigated this, Stuart Aschenbrenner, some of you might know that name. He's spoken at a lot of conferences. He's spoken at Objective by the Sea in the past, if you've ever attended that. Alden Schmidt, he's also spoken at some conferences. He and Stuart gave a talk together this past year at Objective by the Sea in Maui. They're going to be speaking again on this subject this year at Objective by the Sea in Ibiza. So if you're going, expect to hear some interesting stuff. And then Jonathan Simon. The three of them investigated this. So what happened as they investigated and found some really weird stuff going on, they talked to the actual, the person who was actually using that machine that got infected. And the story started to unfold. So what happened is this guy got invited to a meeting with the executives of his company. It's a cryptocurrency company. And so he gets a Zoom link, he joins the meeting. The executives are all there, they're talking and chatting and talking to him, and he's trying to talk back and they can't hear him. So this goes on a little bit. He disconnects from the meeting, rejoins, messes with his settings, etc. Still can't, they still can't hear him. So at one point they say, oh, hey, there's been a Zoom update. You may need to download this extension. And they give him a link. And these are the executives of the company, right? So he clicks the link, he installs the thing. Nothing wrong with that, right? Well, it turns out these were actually the hackers, and they were doing deep fake AI video and audio that convinced him. It was so convincing that he was sure he was on a meeting with the executives. And what he actually ran, so you'll see here this script, it's kind of weird that it's an Apple script, but it kind of looks legitimate, right? You look and you see, oh yeah, that's a zoom.us link. That looks legitimate. Now, if you look at that, it doesn't look like it does much, but oh wait, what? All the way down there at the bottom, after a lot of white space, there's us5web-zoom.biz. That's not legit. So he ran this script, and that ran. It basically curled code down from that URL and ran it. So that was the starting point for the infection. And this is, it was a variant of what's called Blue Noroff, which is a North Korean state-sponsored malware that's very interested in cryptocurrency. What it did is it installed a whole bunch of different implants. And I mean, they were written in so many different languages. There was C++, C, Objective-C, Swift, Go, NIM. I'd never heard of NIM before. I don't know. Anybody else in the room hear of NIM? Apparently it's something like Go and Rust. It can do cross-compiling, so learn something. And it does all kinds of nasty stuff, keylogging, screen capture, clipboard capture. So, if you've copied a password out of your password manager, they've got it. Lots of general purpose info stealing, and a particular focus on stealing crypto wallets. So, and then one really interesting thing that it did is, you really can't do process injection on macOS anymore, not really, but they did. What they did is they had a binary of their own. It was signed by them, so that meant that they could inject into it. And it was really kind of just an empty binary. It didn't do anything. But they loaded some code down in memory, shoved that code into this so-called sacrificial binary so that it never touched the disk, and then executed it there. So this was a very sophisticated attack. And just a really fascinating story. So, and that was one of the things that we've seen. Here's something a little bit different. This is something that we saw in a few incidents where there was an Apple script, and it's a fairly lengthy Apple script. This is only part of it, that eventually was identified as Odyssey. It's a new, relatively new stealer. And so, yeah, we were seeing this, and it was absolutely 100% suspicious. You look at this code, and this is just a tiny little bit, but it's function called file grabber. Does what it says. It grabs a file, uploads it to the attacker. So, and there was a whole bunch of other stuff in here, including, collecting your password. So it, does the old AppleScript trick of throwing up a fake password prompt. You type your password in there. It goes to the malware in clear text because it's not a legit password prompt. And then it captures all kinds of data from browsers, from Telegram, cryptocurrency wallets again. That's a very hot topic for a lot of malware these days. And it writes it out to the temp folder and sends it up to the attacker via curl. So, and then at the bottom there's a blog post from a company called Cypherma that was describing this info stealer. So then we're going to dive into a few other suspicious activities that you see. So this is one that we see fairly frequently where, you see something, in this case, probably a script not running in the terminal because the terminal was not in the process tree when this ran. And they're using SPCTL to try and disable Gatekeeper. Try. On modern Mac OS, this doesn't work anymore, but still, it's an old tried and true technique that some hackers use in their malware. It's also something that your average user may just go on Google and, find this and type it in. So, this is one of those things that it could be legitimate. It could just be somebody doing something stupid, or it could be something malicious, and it takes more investigation to know which. This one is very similar, CSR util disable, trying to turn off SIP. Of course, as we all know in this room probably, that does not work unless you're in recovery mode. But so this may be more likely to be a user who found this on Google and typed it in. Terminal was in the process tree in this one, so it was a parent of that process. Probably not a script from a hacker in this case. SSH being enabled from the shell, that's a popular thing for malware. It wants to enable some kind of remote access. It's also something a lot of users like to do. So this, again, could be legit, could be malware. It is a little bit suspicious that it was executed by PowerShell. You don't see too much PowerShell on Mac OS, so this could have been something malicious that was, designed to target a variety of OSs and happened to be running on Mac OS. Keychain dumps. This is getting a little bit more suspicious now. You don't typically see your average user trying to dump their keychain. This one was, in the case that I was looking at, it was being executed from a script. So fairly strong likelihood that that was some kind of a stealer trying to get the user's keychain. But again, we don't know. So that's where you really have to do further investigation. Clearing the quarantine, that's also a very common user behavior. If you've ever downloaded something that macOS just didn't want to run, maybe it wasn't signed or something like that, you might try clearing the quarantine. That doesn't really work anymore. Not on modern macOS, it doesn't rely solely on the quarantine flag anymore, so it can, Gatekeeper and Xprotect can check it even without a quarantine flag, but still, this is very common with malware. In this case, this probably wasn't malware. It looks like it was actually a cracked app, a pirated app that was being distributed, and that's the way that it gets around, the whole signing process. So that was in this case, it was not malicious per se, but it often is. ZSH reverse shell. So this is basically in the terminal or in whatever is running a script, whatever shell you're running in. Basically, you're getting a reverse shell. So you're connecting to another computer. That computer then can send arbitrary commands back, and your computer will execute them. Sometimes, that sort of thing is done legitimately, although usually not this way. You'd usually just enable SSH in sharing. So this is pretty suspicious. Also seen on the machine, which kind of raises the level of suspicion, was a proxy called shadow socks, which is commonly used to bypass firewalls. So like if you had something in place that was designed to prevent the machine from calling out to certain domains, known malicious domains, that sort of thing, shadow socks might have been put there to get around that. So this is much more suspicious, this kind of thing. Netcat. I'm sure some of you in this room have probably used Netcat before. It's a legit tool. That -E flag, though, that doesn't exist on macOS. That's a Windows thing. And this is new information for me. I didn't realize this until I was looking at this particular instance, this particular event. That -E flag is a Windows thing that malware often uses. It basically tells, it's another way of establishing a reverse shell. So you're executing bash and giving a remote machine access to bash. So kind of interesting there. I learned something with this one. I didn't know that you could do that. Now we're getting into some more, definitely bad behaviors. In this case, what you'll see in this command here is you're taking ZSH and you're echoing and I've got it truncated. It's a long base64 encoded string. And you're piping that into base64 to decode it. And then you're piping the result of that into bash. So this is a very, very common behavior for malware to obfuscate the payload. So, you've got your antivirus sitting there. It's looking at this file. Honestly, even, an antivirus looking at a file like this should say, hey, wait a minute, why is it piping, into something into base64 to decode it and then into bash. But it can't see that payload, so that's part of the purpose of doing this. And this was seen inside of a launch agent plist file, or a launch daemon plist file with a very weird, suspicious name. So you see that sort of thing, that's absolutely 100% malware. This is something that we've been seeing in the Mac security community for, I said years in the slide, probably at least a decade, from the Bundalore adware. Using OSA script to get credentials. This is another very, very common attacker behavior. So you'll see things like, OSA script, do shell script, and then, some other things. In this case, it's trying to get some information, and it's got with administrator privileges, so that will prompt you with a legit macOS authentication dialog where you're going to enter your credentials, and then that escalates this to root, and it's able to get this information. And this was also seen being executed by a very suspicious process. That's a weird name, right? That's, org dot some, bunch of numbers, and This is behavior seen with something called Xloader, which was first seen back in 2021. We see a lot of other weird OSA script stuff. I have actually seen stuff like an Apple script that had inside of it do shell script, and then in the do shell script it called OSA script. Weird, right? It's, Apple script calling a shell script that's calling Apple script. Weird stuff. I don't know why they do stuff like that, but Apple script is very commonly abused by attackers just because it can show these password dialogues. It's really easy to do. Here's something very interesting, I thought, is we saw OSA script being called from PowerPoint. And that's weird, right? I see some laughs, I see some smiles. That's not something that should be happening. And if you're wondering, well, why get system info? If you look at the info here, some of this stuff can be used to determine if you're running in a VM, So like CPU type, physical memory, things like that. There's a distinct difference in the results you'll get from a real machine versus what you get out of a VM. So this is probably malware that's executing, trying to find out, am I on a real machine, or is this a malware researcher that's looking at this malware and trying to figure out what it does and whether it's malicious or not? So, this is a very common thing with malware to try and sort of short circuit any malicious behavior when it thinks it's being analyzed. Here's another example, in this case being run by Excel, shell script calling IOReg to get the platform UUID. Again, that's going to be very different for a VM than it is for a real machine. So same sort of thing here. It's malware trying to avoid detection. Why it's executing from Excel, I don't know. Probably a script in Excel, a macro in Excel. And then here's another really interesting one that I don't even know whether this would work these days or not. But it's basically a shell command being executed by Excel that's trying to take a file in the Excel data folder in containers and take that and encrypt it and send it to standard out, presumably to then send it off to somewhere else, to the attacker. I don't know whether this would actually work on a modern machine with modern Office, because I don't know that it would have access to the file system, but I don't know. Maybe they found a way around that. I don't know. There's some of these are starting to get into less, suspicious behavior and more, we know this is malicious. We just look at it and it's almost more of an antivirus sort of thing where it's like, yes, this is definitely bad. So atomic stealer, this is kind of a known way that atomic stealer gets onto the machine is, through this attempt to mount a DMG. One of the suspicious things you'll see here is you'll see it has -private and -no browse. -private and -no browse, they both do the same thing. They basically make it so that you can't see the image on the desktop. The weird thing here is that private is an undocumented flag. That's not something that most folks would know about, but yet it's there. So very weird behavior known to be seen with atomic stealer. few more here. We've got bundleor execution. This is Shopify is a known bundleor brand, so to speak. I think I was seeing Shopify more than a decade ago, and it's still around. So, this is known bad behavior for bundleor droppers. Bundleor, for those that haven't heard of it before, it's a kind of adware dropper, and the installer itself can install all kinds of different pieces of adware. So you never quite know what you're going to get with this. Install core, that's another very similar piece of malware, piece of adware. And in this case, again, like I've been seeing that particular name, updater.watch.mcy, for many, many years, and they're still using it today. So that's known behavior for install core. And then a couple of last ones here. We actually can see what's going on from XProtect. And I've always wanted to see what was going on behind the scenes with XProtect. What is it actually detecting? Because it's so quiet, you don't typically know what's going on with XProtect. Well, we can see, for example, on this one machine that it detects this JS Print Manager 4 as Pirit, which is some known malware for Mac OS. It's been around a long time. Years ago, the Mac versions of Pirit were called vSearch, if you've heard of that, if you're an old timer in the room. So, this is something that XProtect detected. So, you can kind of guarantee if XProtect detected it, there's something going on there. And then this is an interesting one because I have no idea what sheep swap is. Nobody in the security community has anything that they call sheep swap. This is an internal name that Apple uses. But we can see on multiple different endpoints all of these different apps that are being detected as sheep swap, whatever that is. And they all have this weird naming scheme like, Cache Sprint, Essential Project, Technology Main, really meaningless names. None of these could be found in VirusTotal. So we really don't know a whole lot about these. All of them were executed from the user's applications folder, which is not normal in most environments. I don't know. Does anybody in here actually use the user's applications folder for anything? I see one hand, two hands. Okay, a few. A lot of places don't use that. WebEx, yeah. So whatever this is, we don't know. It's an internal Apple name, but it's definitely, there's something malicious about it. So that's sort of a review of some of the weird things that we see going on. There's a lot of people still, even to this day, I still hear Macs don't get malware, do they? Definitive proof that they do. It happens all the time, much more than you would realize. So security software is definitely still necessary, right? Macs get infected despite the fact that they actually have got pretty strong security built in. I as a security guy, I will tell you, yes, Macs can get infected, but they're still, by default, out of the box, more secure than a Windows machine, in my opinion. So that reduces how common the malware is, but it's still out there. Unfortunately, and I'm going to pick on Apple a little bit here, modern Mac OS can actually have an impact on your security sometimes. So what I'm talking about in particular here is transparency, consent, and control. Now, a lot of people in the room probably know where I'm going with this. Anybody who's not a long-term Mac admin, maybe you're new to Mac, you might not. But so we get these alerts here, and this is great. It's telling me BB Edit, which is a great text editor. I love BB Edit. Wants to have access to my desktop folder. So I get to choose. I get to say, okay, yes, I'm trying to open a document in the desktop folder with BB Edit. Or I can say, wait a minute, why is it trying to get access to my desktop folder? No, I don't want that. I don't want that to happen. So you get the choice, which is overall a very good thing. The problems when this happens, you get prompted for every little thing that some app is trying to do, and most users don't have the time or the patience to figure out what they should do here, right? They just look at it and they're going to click whatever they want to click to get rid of this stupid thing that just popped up on their screen while they're in the middle of a Zoom meeting or while they're trying to work on some document. And they may choose the wrong thing. They may allow something that shouldn't have been allowed, or they may not. They may disallow something that they really needed to allow in order for legitimate functionality to work. And sometimes that can be a problem. So I got a short little video here. I think some people know what this is.
Mac has issued a salutation, cancel or allow.
Allow, and I'm a PC.
You're returning Mac salutation, cancel or allow?
Allow.
Okay, what gives? Mac is asking a question, cancel or allow?
Allow. He's part of Vista, my new operating system. PCs have a lot of security problems, so he asked me to authorize pretty much anything I do.
You're pointing out Vista's flaws, cancel or allow?
Allow. I could turn him off, but then he wouldn't give me any warnings at all, and that would defeat the purpose. So.
You are coming to a sad realization, cancel or
Allow.
allow?
So that's an ad that Apple made. I don't remember exactly how long ago. It's probably at least 10 years ago or so. Poking fun at Vista for exactly the sort of thing that Apple does today. So I have fun laughing about that. So there, some things about these prompts is they typically only show up once. Right? So, you see this. So this is from our software, but it doesn't have to be just from Huntress. It could be from any security software, anything that's trying to install an endpoint security extension. And so this shows up once, right? Never comes back again unless you do something, to make it come back. If you hit the wrong button, as a user, you probably don't know which one to hit. You see this pop up, you're like, I don't know what this is. Or maybe you think, yeah, okay, sounds legit. This is security software. My security team told me that they were installing this. I'm going to let it go. Okay. Well, not quite. So there are dark patterns here. If you click the default button there, the OK button, absolutely nothing happens. Your system extension is not installed. The user might think it is. You might think it is if you are not aware of the way this works on macOS, but hasn't been installed if you just hit OK. Now I'm going to go off on a little side rant here on these alerts. I'm sure you guys have seen this one. And like I said, they only show up once, right? No. This one is different. Why is this one different? I have no idea. I don't know why this one just keeps coming up over and over and over again. I keep having to say don't allow over and over and over again. Little off topic, but it bugs me, so I thought I'd point it out. That is the one exception, though. None of the rest of these keep coming up over and over again. So if you're deploying security software of any kind on Mac OS, it's going to need permission. So we're in the age where we aren't in the kernel anymore. 10 years ago, if somebody was writing like an antivirus program or something like that, if you wanted to be able to do something like block execution of some process, things like that, you had to be in the kernel. You had to have a kernel extension. That could cause kernel panics. It could cause all kinds of problems. Apple didn't like that, justifiably. So they created this thing called the Endpoint Security Framework, and that means security products need some kind of permission to run. If you're not an experienced Mac admin, and I don't know how many folks in the room may or may not be, you may not be familiar with the fact that these are even needed. So we deal with a lot of Windows first IT admins, and they're used to, they deploy the security software in Windows, they run the installer, everything is good. Mac OS, they do the same thing, and then they think, okay, everything is good. Turns out, not so much. So we did for about the last 6 or 7 months, we've been looking at how many customers, how many endpoints are fully enabled, with all of the permissions necessary for the security software to run. And it was bad. You can see this was one where it was at 28%. Only 28% of their endpoints were actually getting what they were paying for. The rest of them were not fully turned on. So in order to actually do this, one of the things that endpoint security requires is full disk access. Doesn't work without full disk access. So like if you have a system extension or something like that, it simply won't do what it needs to do without. And yet macOS won't tell you that it needs that. So you kind of have to know. If you're not using endpoint security, if you've got some kind of security software that's not using it, still without full disk access, you're still partially blind. You can't see what's going on in a lot of different areas on the hard drive. So it's really, for any security product, whether it's using the endpoint security framework or not, this is really important. Without stuff like full disk access, you might have it installed, but it's not actually working. So what we're going to talk about now, and this may be old hat for some of you, and it might be brand new. I'm hoping that for some folks in here, this is new and this will help you. We're going to talk about how to correctly deploy security software of any kind on Mac OS. There are basically two ways to deploy your security software. One, and this is very common in a lot of Windows first companies, is you either do it manually or you use an RMM to push the installer out to your endpoints, right? That's a problem in this case because doing all this endpoint security stuff requires, in this case, some hands-on keyboard. Or on modern Mac OS, you can also do it with screen sharing. Back when all this stuff was still new, Apple wouldn't let you do it via screen sharing. You could not click some of these prompts and allow stuff from within screen sharing. The other problem here is when you push the installer out, the end user will see these alerts pop up. They'll see something like an endpoint security extension alert pop up. So that's a problem. This is really not the ideal way to do things, but we commonly see this because a lot of organizations that are Windows first don't have an MDM and they don't want to spend the money on an MDM. So it's a problem, and it's not one that's easily solvable. However, if you do have an MDM, you're golden. That's the way to go. Jordy approves. You can basically do it silent, no hassle, end user sees nothing. All you've got to do is push out a profile and then the installer. Boom, you're done. So if you're deploying security software of any kind, and I'm not, I mean from any company, that is the way to go. You want to have an MDM, and it makes your life so much easier. It's definitely worth the cost of having an MDM just so that you can do that. So let's go through, this is going to show you kind of why this is important. We're going to start here with manual installation, and I'm using our software as the example, but this applies to anything. It applies to the software from my previous employer, from all of our competitors. It's the same for everybody. So first you run the installer. When you run that installer, if there is a system extension involved, which there usually is, not every time, but there usually is, you're going to see this pop up. And like I said earlier, if you just click OK, that does nothing at all. And one of the problems here, if your user sees this, if you push this out manually and your user sees this and clicks OK, you can get it installed. You can take care of that, but there are some later steps that can be a problem sometimes. So what you want to do, when you see this, you click Open System Settings, and that will open to here. If you needed to find this later, it's in the General section under Login Items and Extensions. Now, macOS has taken you here, right? Now what? Doesn't tell you. So you have no idea. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I see Huntress there. It's turned on, right? Everything should be okay, right? No, that's not the right one. So it does not tell you that you have to click this little I button here next to Endpoint Security Extensions. So you have to click that. That will take you into here. Here's where you will see any of the security, the system extensions that your security product installs. There may be only one, there may be multiple. It just depends on the product. And you've got to go and you've got to check each one of them that's in here. So you just click that little button there. Just for your edification, that little 3-dot icon that's just to the right of the switch, your users can click that and they can turn it off. They can uninstall it. So there is a way to bypass that in Sequoia with a profile. You deploy a profile with your MDM, and you can make it so that they can't do that. But it only exists in Sequoia, not older systems, and you can only do that with an MDM. So, little bit of a problem. The next thing that's going to happen once you've got the system extension installed is if there is a network filter with your security product. And there may be, for a variety of reasons, you may have a security product that does some kind of web protection. It may do, who knows what. In our case, it's for host isolation, so that if something is going on with a machine and we need to isolate it from the network, we use the network filter to basically deny any network connections except to our own systems. So, but that's just one reason out of many that there might be a network filter. So here you have to click the Allow button. This is where problems come in, though, because if your user sees this and they click Don't Allow, there's no easy way to bring that back. If you're doing this manually and you're having the user step through and they do something wrong here, you're probably going to need to talk to your security vendor and find out, how do I restart this process? How do I get this prompt to show back up? Because there's no easy way within macOS to get that to happen. So then the next thing you have to do is one that the prompts don't tell you about, so you kind of just have to know this is necessary. And a lot of, especially Windows First admins, don't know that this is even a thing. So you've got to go into System Settings, Privacy and Security, and Full Disk Access. And you'll see this. There will be a bunch of things there, as you can see. Some of them, this was on my system. I have given terminal full disk access. You might question the wisdom of that, but I have chosen to do it. SSHD is by default given full disk access. So, some interesting things in there. But the ones we're really interested in are the ones for your security software. So you want to turn those on. Once that's done, then everything should be fully functional. Without this, even if you have installed the system extension, allowed the network filter, it's still not 100% functional. So full disk access is really a hard requirement. You've got to get in there and do that. So that's the manual process. As you can see, it's a little bit of a pain in the butt, maybe more than a little bit, especially if you have to do this for, 100 endpoints. Training your users to do this is pretty tough. Getting a technician to have time to do this is pretty tough. But some people do it that way. So now let's talk about the better way to do it. This is what I try to encourage everybody to do. If you don't have an MDM, you really need one for macOS. It's almost not a viable option to not have one. So first thing you have to do is you want to deploy what's called a PPPCP. That stands for Privacy Preferences Policy Control Profile. That's a mouthful. That's why we like to abbreviate that. But it's essentially a .mobile config file, which is a fancy plist file. You can see here a little excerpt from it. It's just like any other plist, which is XML. And your security vendor, whoever that is, should be able to provide you one of these that has all the necessary things in it to get their software working correctly. And so you use that, you deploy it with your MDM to all the endpoints you're going to put your security software on. And you do this first. Do this before you install the security software, and then that prevents your end users from ever seeing any of the prompts. So it's completely silent. Now, one warning, if you do this, a lot of MDMs have like a UI where you can build your own PPPC profiles, in a GUI. Don't do that with security software unless you absolutely have to. Go to your security vendor and use what they give you because it's correct. They've tested it. It's got all the right stuff in it. We've seen countless examples where people have rolled their own and it goes wrong, sometimes badly wrong. We've seen cases where it cuts off the internet connection because something about the way that it's allowing the network filter is wrong, or maybe because sometimes they've got two different profiles that are both trying to control the same thing and they conflict. It can be a real mess. So if you can help it, don't roll your own unless you really know what you're doing. Just go get whatever your security vendor gives you and push that out. And if you're not sure how to do this, just, refer to your MDM docs or contact your MDM provider and say, hey, how do I deploy this profile? I've got the file, just need to push it onto the endpoints. How do I do that? And they should be able to help you. Step 2 is you deploy your installer. And if your security vendor knows what they're doing, they're going to either provide you with a .pkg installer file, or they're going to give you a script that will take care of the installer for you. If they give you a .dmg file, that's a little bit more difficult to deploy. But this is easy. So you can deploy your .pkg or your script. You may need to do some custom stuff. So I've seen it done a couple of ways. Like I've seen vendors that give you a custom PKG that's only for you, was built specifically for you, has your account info in it. So you just run that and everything goes fine. I've seen other vendors where it's a generic installer. It's not hard coded with your information, and you have to provide whatever account information is needed, either like through command line flags or a configuration file or something like that. So you're probably going to need to figure out, your security vendor should tell you what's needed there, but ultimately you're really just pushing out the installer. And it'll go out to all the endpoints you target. You've already sent the profile out to those endpoints. So when this happens, everything just silently installs. Your users don't have to do anything. They don't see anything. And it's like magic. So one gotcha here. Once you've done this, a lot of people want to go in there and just verify, okay, is everything actually set up properly? And they'll go into system settings, maybe manually on an endpoint, or maybe through screen sharing, something like that. And they'll go and they'll look in system settings and try to figure out, does it have full disk access or not? Don't do that. It's not actually going to show you what you want to see, because if you have pushed this out with an MDM, it's not going to show that you have full disk access in system preferences. So it's very misleading in that way. It's not that Apple has intended to make it misleading. That's just the way it is. So if you're doing this and you want to verify that it's turned on, check with your security vendor. They should have a way for you to verify. They may have something like this in their portal that can show you that everything is green. They may have a command line command that you can run remotely. They may have both. So talk to your vendor, figure out what the right way is to figure out whether it's enabled, and do that. Don't look at system settings. And I breezed through that quicker than I did in practice, so we got plenty of time for questions. So, anybody have any questions out there?
The coffee. Okay, I'm gonna out myself here.
Ooh.
Let me try closer. Okay, 30 plus year. That's really bad.
I see them doing something back in the back. And,
Plus year Windows admin, going to Mac. Our latest thing that's hitting all of our university systems in my college is all of these Chrome, click here, we need to help you. And they're all Trojans, every one of them. They're being stripped. What effect do these sorts of things have on the Mac side?
they really don't have any more significant effect on the Mac than they do Windows. You know, it's an annoyance, but it really isn't a security issue.
These are trying to install keystroke loggers.
Oh, these are.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
They're running they're trying to run a PowerShell script.
Yeah, okay. I haven't seen that on Mac OS. It's possible they might be doing it, but in a lot of cases with stuff like that, in theory, the PowerShell might run on a Mac, but it probably is designed to target Windows and probably won't do anything to the Mac as a result. So it might be the sort of thing like that netcat command that I was talking about earlier that uses the -E flag to establish a reverse shell. That doesn't work on a Mac. You might see it executing on a Mac for a reason like that, but it won't actually do anything.
It's ClickFix,
Yeah,
a new version of ClickFix.
Yeah.
But it's hitting us really hard.
yeah. And the other thing is, depending on what exactly the payload is, sometimes there's a Windows payload and there's a Mac payload. So in that case, your Mac security software should be able to catch that if something gets downloaded and executed. But yeah, like I would keep an eye on that and ask your Mac users to report that to you. And do you have a security operations center?
Yes, and they
yeah.
actually didn't know this is happening. I was the one that told them.
Lovely.
They're new.
That's another.
We're not.
Another
going
problem.
No, we're not
yeah.
going there. This is being aired. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
I don't need to look for a new job. This
Yeah. So it's hard to know exactly what might be going on there, but it's not something I've seen resulting in Mac infections. Doesn't mean it can't be. So. Can you put your info back up there? Put what? Oh yeah, my info. Let's see. Go back. There we go. Another question over there. Empty.
Is this thing on? Yeah. So we've known you for 15 years as the safe Mac guy and the Malwarebytes guy. What prompted the move to an EDR?
Well, a couple of things. One was Malwarebytes had a series of layoffs, and my entire team got laid off. So I ended up looking for a job, and I had heard of Huntress. I knew that they had very recently been working on a Mac agent, and so serendipity, everything just sort of worked out. However, I also really had been wanting to work on an EDR for years, and I was about this close to being able to do it at Malwarebytes. Just not close enough. Because I'm just fascinated with the idea of being able to see these behaviors and potentially catch things that nobody else has seen before. That's something that's always fascinated me, but it's really difficult to use antivirus data to do that because antivirus is detecting stuff that you know about already. It's hard to catch something new. So that's where I really was interested in EDR. So I'm really excited to be looking into that now. Any other questions? All right. If no other questions, thank you everybody, and thank you.